a secret code book for me would have been a book that was around my house growing up called The Big Book of Stories. And it was just filled with lots of simple little stories, but there was one story that really resonated for me, and it was called Susan in the Rain. And I guess the reason that it stood out for me was because the little girl's name was Susan, and that's my name. And it's a story about a little girl who would become really pouty when it would rain. And it was a big rain period. And so she would often have to be inside. I kind of minimize the meaning of the story, but I think maybe it is a little bit deeper because I grew up in the city. And part of my life, particularly in the summer when I did most of my reading, on my own or for pleasure, most of my life involved playing outside with friends. So, when it rained, that was a big deal because you weren't running up and down the block or around down the alleyway or, hanging out on the porch with your friends. As readers, we make connections. So this idea of a connection did happen by virtue of this main character having the same name as me. This idea of not being able to be outdoors because of the rain was something that we really shared in common that went beyond our name. And then another piece of that book that just made it like an important story for me was that my niece I grew up with, we're only 4 years difference in age. She liked looking at the big book of stories too, but she couldn't read them as well as I could. And when she found out that I liked Susan in the Rain, she wanted me to read it to her. And so after a while, the story that was my favorite story in the big book of stories, I really was like, I think I started to hide the book because here would come Karen, can you read me Susan in the Rain? But it was kind of like a cool thing, and it actually made me feel pretty cool to be able to read a story to her that she was so engaged in. And I just kind of remember the two of us snuggling together and me with the big book reading to her. So that was an important book for me. And looking back, it also speaks to the idea of wanting to find yourself in the books that you read. And I was able to find myself in Susan in the Rain. And from that point, kind of went on to find more books that kind of spoke to me on a really personal level.